Fallout 76 is a bad game. At least that's what everyone would have you believe. Back in 2018, when the game launched, I would agree it was a buggy mess, server stability was atrocious, and it was damn near unplayable. 6 years later, the game is still going on. There's a decently sized community around it, and it's getting updates at a moderate pace, with the new Skyline Valley update being its most recent one. So why do people hate it still? For one, I think most people are still jaded by its initial launch, and second, there's a majority of people on the internet that believe New Vegas is the best Fallout and everything else doesn't compare. While New Vegas was the game that got me into the franchise and is a great game overall, it's important to remember, without Fallout 3 or Bethesda, New Vegas wouldn't exist. That, however, is a discussion for another time. 76, while being called a bad game, is also touted as a terrible Fallout game. It's a sentiment that many of my friends spout at me, so I set out to see for myself if anything has improved over the years or if the internet was right. My story with Fallout 76 is a bumpy one. I got it at launch and couldn't wait to play it, not so much because it was going to be a live service game, but more so because it was a new Fallout game. I was a big fan of Fallout 4, so getting a new installment was perfect. The launch, however, was anything but. Between the horrible performance of the game to the terrible PR surrounding it, things were not looking good. I didn't stick around long, especially when at the time I'd be disconnected after every 2 minutes or so during my play sessions. I would then go on to pick up and put down Fallout 76 at least 3 more times in the following years, all while never getting farther than maybe a quarter of the way through the main storyline. So with my immense backlog daunting me, I decided it was finally time to jump back in and see this through to the end. Upon starting the game, you create your character and get to explore the recently emptied Vault 76. You then go through a short tutorial station giving you glimpses as to what you can do out in the wasteland. You allocate your perks, you grab your camp, and you can even head up to the Overseer's office to find out where she went. When you exit the vault, you are greeted by arguably the most diverse wasteland aesthetically. You start off in the lush forests of West Virginia, but as you explore, you'll uncover the foggy ash heap, the irradiated campgrounds to the north, the dense mire, and finally, the bog. Recent updates have added zones outside of Appalachia and a new expansion to the base of the map. Each zone is unique in how it looks, and the kind of creatures you can find there are varied. In the forests, for example, you'll find wild animals that have been mutated. These range from radstags to mole rats to possums to wild dogs. In the denser urban areas, you'll be swarmed by ghouls. You'll also have to deal with robots and the occasional super mutant. The campgrounds have the formidable Mirelurks, and the mole miners occupy the ash heap as they defend the mines they once filled. The mire houses some of the more deadly foes like gulpers, and the occasional hermit crab that's attached to a trailer, which I didn't even think was possible. Since the Wastelanders update, humans have returned to Appalachia, so be careful, because blood eagles and raiders are lying in wait to ambush you. However, in every region, you'll face the Scorched. This brings us to 76's main plot. After 76 opened, its dwellers began exploring the wastes to reclaim Appalachia. Once outside, they began to notice that there was a creature that resembles a human, but was not mindless like the ghoul. The Overseer discovers this first, and as you follow her trail, you also come to know the Scorch as humans who have succumbed to some form of radiation damage and now act as a hive mind. You follow the Overseer's quest and try to piece together what happened after the bombs fell, all while looking for a way to cure the Scorch Plague. At launch, this was one of the things that people didn't like. There were no NPCs that weren't robots, so you were constantly chasing ghosts. You followed terminal entries, audio logs, and notes to your next objectives. As I played through the main campaign, I don't necessarily think this was a bad choice. Feels a bit awkward now that humans have returned, but at the time it actually gave the wasteland that true empty feeling. Yes, while you could run into other players, you didn't know if you could trust them or not, and sometimes those encounters are very few and far between. You were solving the mystery of what went wrong in a post-apocalyptic world, and that's fascinating to me. Through the main quest, you learn about the major factions that were trying to deal with the Scorch Plague. The first faction you learn about are the Responders, former emergency personnel who banded together to help people. You'll find the remnants of their group mainly in the forests. Surviving members have, however, taken up post at the White Springs Resort. We then learn about the Fire Breathers, who were former firemen. We learn about a band of raiders that were held up in the top of the world, the Free States, who were survivalists hunkering down in the mire, and the initial iteration of the Brotherhood of Steel. As you play through the story, you'll find logs and memos that flesh out members of these factions and what they were getting up to before everyone disappeared. What draws them all together is the collective goal of stopping the Scorch, which would lead to the factions interacting with one another at some point in time. There are many mysteries and secrets to uncover as you explore West Virginia, including why there are small groups of super mutants roaming around. Speaking of, that's one of the things that a lot of people disliked about Fallout 76. You see, some lore has been recontextualized as this is the earliest game in the timeline. So we find out how the Brotherhood came to be, as well as how these East Coast super mutants got here. I don't necessarily mind this because to me it doesn't take away or ruin these factions in previous games. It's easy to see how fans can be upset, but at the end of the day, other games have gotten retconned a lot worse. Just look at what Shadowlands did to World of Warcraft. I want to circle back to something I discussed at the start of the video. The notion that 76 is a bad Fallout game. While opinions on games are subjective, I think it's important to make sure that we look at what fundamentally makes a Fallout game. RPG mechanics such as skill points, dialogue choices, and different outcomes. Gunplay, which has now become a staple since Fallout 3, inventory management, and as of Fallout 4, settlements and camp building. To be fair, while 76 has added dialogue choices, there's no real choice and consequence when it comes to quests. At least, none in the base campaign. There could be some in the DLC, but at the time of writing, I haven't played any of the DLC yet. While 76 initially had a focus on eating and drinking, much like older titles' survival or hardcore modes, it scaled it back based on player feedback. Now, while it's not imperative to keep these meters up, you do receive a slight bonus for doing so. 76 at its core is just like any other Fallout. In fact, I think it works much better when you don't engage with any of its multiplayer and live service aspects. I ignored most of the repeatable daily quests as well as public events, and didn't really go out of my way to interact with people. I often found myself just wandering around and letting the world open up for me as I discovered new locations. Some locations offer nothing more than some quick loot, while others have little stories tied to them via notes and environmental storytelling. Just like previous titles. I did this more in the opening hours rather than later on, and that's mainly because I wanted to get this video out by the end of the summer. When I started writing this, I was still working through the main story with a laundry list of proper side quests still to do. This has always been a pro for Fallout, because it leads to replayability. While you could go out of your way to do everything in one playthrough, it would take an extremely long time. So I don't mind skipping most of the side quests when I can always come back to them later. I mentioned before how Appalachia featured various biomes, which is possible because of how massive the map is in 76. Something I find lends itself well to the game is the fact that the map isn't tied to your Pip-Boy this time around. Instead, when you open the map, it looks like a proper paper map with illustrations denoting landmarks throughout the world. So where in older titles you'd be looking at a grid on a computer screen, now you have some visual representation of what's out there to discover. At the start of this game, the only icon you see on the map is Vault 76, but as you progress it becomes dotted with dozens and dozens of locales that you can fast travel to. Unfortunately, you need caps to fast travel. While you can take a perk to cut the cost of it down, I'm still not the biggest fan of it. I understand why a fast travel cost is implemented. They most likely want you to explore the world instead of ping-ponging between locations. But when there's a lot of backtracking, it can be a hindrance on your wallet. Especially when you're trying to save up money to buy items from one of the few vendors at train stations. This is one thing I found relatively tedious in 76. Every major quest has backtracking to one location multiple times throughout the quest chain. Sometimes you have to go halfway across the map to grab a holotape just to come all the way back. Thankfully, if you explore early on, you'll discover a lot of points that can get you in the vicinity of the location you need to go. And you can also place your camp in proximity to quest hubs to make dropping off scrap and freeing up your bags easier. With its greater emphasis on survival, Fallout 76 forces you to pay attention to gear degradation now more than ever. For the RPer or someone who wants a challenge, this can be a great thing. You constantly have to balance out what you carry on your person, and you need to keep tabs on what junk you need to keep your weapons and armor in tip-top shape. Thankfully, they won't break every time you venture away from your camp or a safe location, especially with perk cards that cause them to break slower and slower the higher the rank the perk is. But it's still something to keep in mind. There were a handful of times where I wasn't paying attention and had my sniper break on me in the middle of combat. While your carry weight is limited at the start, you can increase it exponentially by acquiring perk cards like Strong Back and upgrading your strength stat. Perks also got a small rework. Instead of selecting perks and upgrading them, you get perk cards upon each level, which allow you to customize your build to be exactly how you like it. And due to a post-launch update, you can find punch card stations in certain locales, or you can build one at your camp, which allows you to reset your skill points and perk cards so you can try out an entirely different build. For example, I was speccing into rifles and melee, but switched to a full melee build once I got a decent legendary weapon. There's plenty of guides out there to help you find the build for you if you're not big into build crafting like me. Camps can be an integral part of your 76 experience or ignored entirely. Much like settlements in Fallout 4, you build structures using components you acquire by breaking down junk you find in the wasteland. You can't build everything all at once, however. You need to find plans out in the world or get them via quest rewards. Sometimes you can even buy them from vendors if you have enough caps. You'll need these plans to build workbenches to repair and craft new items. However, if you'd like to ignore the camp system entirely, you can. There are set locations like the White Spring Resort that have every workstation you need, as well as vendors and stash boxes where you can store anything you don't need to carry on you. The community makes some insane camps, and if you want to get into it, I recommend doing quests to earn plans and recipes to help you out. Earlier in the video, I mentioned how I hadn't beaten the story when I started writing the script. Since beginning this video, I have finished the main quest. I launched my nuke and made my mark on Appalachia. This did require a bit of help from the Fallout 76 Reddit. I messed up entering the launch code after working through the silo for about 30 minutes. Thankfully, the community was helpful and generous. To those who helped me, I sincerely thank you. Fallout 76 doesn't do anything groundbreaking with its story. It introduces some interesting concepts if you're a longtime fan of the franchise, but there's nothing incredibly groundbreaking here. I haven't done any of the DLC yet, but between Wastelanders and the Brotherhood of Steel expansions, I know there's more stories to expand and flesh out Appalachia. I also have a significant amount of side quests left that I know I'll return to do one day. On the gameplay front, it's also pretty standard for a Fallout title. There are things that I like, and some things that can be frustrating at times. In fact, they even tried a Battle Royale mode, and while I was sad to see it go, it wasn't necessarily the most polished feature. But for everyone who constantly says this game is bad, or it's a terrible Fallout game, it just doesn't make sense to me after sinking in almost 60 hours into it proper. Is it a perfect game? No. Will it ever be perfect? Probably not. But in an age where live service games are constantly launching and dying, it's obvious that 76 has staying power. There's a steady community that still plays this game and helps new players out. There are clearly devs that still want to work on it and push out updates and improvements. Now, how many more future updates it'll get is a question yet to be answered. 76 is at its best when you block out the constant chirping of the internet and just allow yourself to wander the wasteland and get lost in it, whether that's as a lone wanderer or with other vault dwellers. There are some bugs that still persist, One extremely annoying one locks you out of crafting workbenches and fast travel when you try to work on power armor. This was terribly frustrating because power armor has always been a big draw for the franchise. There's a quest to craft a unique set of power armor, but every time I went to progress it by building another piece, I would get soft locked. This caused me to log out of the game and relog in. I have, however, since found a solution thanks to Reddit. Basically, you'll draw your weapon, enter third-person mode, and back into the power armor station until the prompt to craft appears. This has worked for me the 2 times I've tried it, but your mileage may vary. I've also been disconnected a small handful of times, and the game has crashed on me twice. But compared to how it was at launch, it's a significant improvement. Even with these handful of issues, the game is still fun. The problem is that nowadays, if a game isn't a 10, then it's a bad game. Fallout 76 is about a 7 out of 10. Maybe a 6 or maybe an 8, it depends on who you ask. It's not amazing, but it's good. It's a fun game to pick up and play, and like the other Fallouts, its wasteland is fun to get lost in and explore. I'd say if you're on the fence, try to get it super cheap so you don't run the fear of feeling like it's a sunk cost. If you're steadfast on never touching it, however, then I don't know if anything I've said has changed your mind. But there is something I've learned after playing this game for the past few months. I was wrong about Fallout 76.